Good evening, everybody. Welcome to JWA's Film Club. I'm Judith Rosenbaum of the Jewish Women's Archive. I am really happy to be back with you today for the first session of this year's Film Club. Please say hello in the chat box. Make sure to chat to everyone. We love to know who's with us and where you're coming from. And also add your questions in the chat, and that's where you should put your questions, and we'll try to bring them in the course of our conversation. A few words about JWA for anybody who's new to us. We are a digital archive. We expand and transform the way that we understand Jewish history and culture by documenting and sharing Jewish women's stories. We also pay special attention to how gender functions in the past and in the present. And we do all of this work because we believe that uncovering a more diverse and nuanced story helps us make a better world. So thank you for being our partners in that work. The virtual programs that we do, the film club and book talks and online history courses, are just one small piece of JWA's work. So I encourage you to check out jwa.org and discover all of the different resources and programs that we have to offer. A quick logistical note, if you would like captioning, you can click the button at the bottom that says CC or show captions, and that should turn them on for you. We are kicking off this year's film club with a discussion of a fabulous and timely documentary short called Under God that hopefully you have watched. It is widely available and it is really worth it. So if you haven't watched it yet, I hope you will after this talk. The film explores the leadership of Jews in the fight for abortion rights in a post-Roe world, and we are very lucky to have two people involved in the film with us tonight. I am delighted to welcome the film's director and producer, Paula Eiselt. Paula is a Peabody Award and DuPont Columbia Award winning Primetime Emmy-nominated, two-time Sundance Film Festival director and jury prize winner film director, known for her journalistic rigor in telling timely and intelligent cinematic stories led by strong-willed characters. Her films have screened at over 100 film festivals worldwide, including Sundance, South by Southwest, and Hot Docs, and distributed on platforms like Hulu, Disney+, HBO Max, PBS's POV, and Art. Her award-winning documentary features include 93 Queen and Aftershock, and most recently Under God, which is what we're discussing tonight. In 2022, IndieWire named Paula one of 22 rising filmmakers to watch, and she's a 2022 Doc NYC 40 Under 40 honoree. She's a graduate of NYU's Tisch School of the Arts, and she lives in New Jersey with her husband and their 4 children, and she's a member of the Television Academy. Welcome, Paula. I'm also really delighted to welcome one of the film's central subjects, Elly, who is a Jewish pro-choice activist in Indiana and a co-founder and co-chair of Hoosier Jews for Choice. She's the daughter of 2 Jewish professionals who taught her from a very young age the importance of tikkun olam, the Jewish value of making the world a better place, and tzedek tirdof, the Jewish value of pursuing justice. Elly moved to Indiana with her family in 2019 after finishing her PhD in international development. We are so glad to have you with us here tonight, both of you. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us. Such a big fan of Jewish Women's Archive, so thank you for all your work.
Thank you. It is a mutual fandom. We love your films and are really glad to be able to talk to you about this one tonight. So as you might imagine, at JWA, we often teach about and create resources about the long history of Jewish involvement in reproductive justice movements, and this is the latest chapter. The attempts after Dobbs of individual states to create abortion bans and restrictions, and Jews being in the lead of attempts to prevent those bills, as Jews have been leaders in earlier waves of reproductive rights activism for more than 100 years. So this is a topic that is both right up our alley and close to our hearts. And I thought we'd start I'd love to hear, Paula, from you, how you started, what motivated you to make this film, and where did you begin? It seems like you jumped on it right away because you were in it just weeks after the Dobbs decision.
Yeah, that's really how it was. The Dobbs decision came down, and like I'm sure everyone here and most of America, I was really devastated and like almost, just like paralyzed by that, like what is going on here. And my friend, mentor, colleague of mine, her name is Roddy Taylor, she called me like the end of that week and was like, like, what are we doing? We need to do something. Like, I saw this article in the New York Times about this rabbi who's suing the state of Florida, due to religious freedom, and that's so interesting. Like, we should do something. And I was like, I would love to. I'm releasing this feature that I'm doing, and I wasn't, looking to jump in that quickly, but she said, if I can get like the fundraising and the partners, like, will you do it? And, what I've always done in my work is like put my passion, my activism, like into the art and into the work. And that's how I try to do my part, and use my skill set to make impact. So I said, okay, she's like, you have till 5 p.m. I was like, okay. And I said, great. And then we really went off and running, and as a filmmaker, a reproductive justice advocate, and someone who cares deeply about all of that and women's rights and empowerment, I felt that this was really going to be an impact-driven film. And it was about finding, obviously, parsing through the legalities of all this, but it's really about the people at the center. And so, there's Rabbi Silver, who is doing his lawsuits. And then I really, really wanted to connect with an impacted woman, someone who really was in it and knew what this meant to her, as I know what it meant to me. And I was connected with a mutual friend, became my friend, Michal Rauscher, who's in the film. And I was, telling her about this, and she actually introduced me to Elly. And that's like how it happened. And it was over, like, I would say, like 2 weeks. Like, everything was super quick. I connected with Elly. She can tell you from her perspective of how that all went. And it was kind of like, we just have to, there was like no time to talk and like really even like get to know each other so well. It was like we had like a shared goal of trying to get this story out. And I was so proud that, as you said, Judith, like, Jewish women and Jewish people were really leading this fight, and being really creative with, how can we take this into our own hands and flip the script. So I was so inspired by Elly and like everything she was doing. So once, like, I met Elly and we started filming with her, I was like, okay, like, we have a story, we have a film, because without that, the humanity and the human face, it's a news article, it's not a film. So that was a long way of saying how this happened.
So Elly, let's turn to you for a minute, because I know this is a really personal story for you. How did you tell us a little bit about your journey and how you decided to be part of this project and got involved in this issue overall?
Yeah, I mean, let's see. So like Paula said, our mutual friend, Michal, reached out to me and she said, I have been introduced to this filmmaker. She's doing this film and she's looking for women to share their stories. Like, would you be interested? And I was very reluctant at first, for a lot of reasons. But I said, sure, I'll talk to her, like, hear what she's thinking. And in our initial conversation, Paula, I don't know if you remember this, we were initially talking about like blurring my face and like, I really wasn't sure whether I wanted to be named or completely anonymous, because, it's just so political here in Indiana. And I really wasn't sure what the security issues would be around being kind of public on this issue, both about reproductive justice, but also then adding the Jewish component to it. And then, as we were talking, and Paula, you may remember details that I don't even remember, but as we were talking and I was kind of getting more into it, I was like, okay, fine, like, forget the blurring the face. Like, this is a cool story. Like, things are happening. And I think we started and it was just going to be, we were just going to focus on kind of me and my story, and then maybe going up to the Capitol for the protest. And then like somewhere along the way, I was like, hey, Paula, we actually started this group. We're actually getting involved in this lawsuit. And we have this Havdalah event. Like, I think like, let's do it. And I mean, the way I saw it, you know, these like we didn't, no one knew this was going to happen. And there was some point that I realized, like, and Paula, I don't know if you know this, but like, I didn't realize for a long time that like I was the story in the film. I thought I was like one of many, or like just a side character. And then it was like, I don't even remember when I learned that like, oh, this is like, I have a central role. And I think, and we've talked about this, Paula, I've gone in waves about kind of my security, my concerns about the security for myself and my family. But ultimately, you know, I decided in conversation with my husband that like, this is a really important issue, and we wanted to raise awareness and, you know, push the fight forward.
Yeah, I mean, and in the film you're not named, and obviously we're not using your last name tonight, so obviously the, you know, the safety concerns remain and are real. What wasn't in the film, I mean, it was very like, you are absolutely the heart, and then there are these other figures who are working on similar cases. And so it's sort of clearer from the other cases, like Professor Marcy Hamilton, who's an expert in what she calls RFRA, which I hadn't realized people refer to it that way, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and sort of sounds like has wanted to use this to flip it and turn it against the religious right for a long time. And this was a great opportunity. And Rabbi Barry Silver, who's a lawyer and a rabbi, and so has that kind of legal piece. But in the film, we don't really hear, Elly, from you about we hear some of your personal story of why this issue matters, but like how did you come to know that there was this opportunity to create this kind of case to push this question of religious freedom from a Jewish angle?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the ACLU is our representation. There are lawyers in this case, and the ACLU really kind of brought the case together and then kind of went looking for plaintiffs. And so they had contacted several of the synagogues, and I was on my synagogue board, and the rabbi said, like, I got this call, basically said, I'm not interested. Does anyone want to do anything with this? And at that point, Hoosier Jews for Choice had sort of just started forming, and we were just starting to talk about like what we wanted to do. And there were several of us on the synagogue board, actually, and we said, like, yeah, let's think about it. So the rabbi sent me the information, and I contacted the lawyer, and I said, like, you know, tell me more about this. And through our conversations with the lawyers, and then with other members of Hoosier Jews for Choice and other members of the community, we said, like, this sounds like something we want to put our name on. And in the end, I believe there are 5 plaintiffs on the case, 4 anonymous individuals, and Hoosier Jews for Choice is the only named plaintiff, which, you know, this is something we can discuss later. I've had a lot of conversations with synagogues and Jewish communities through this work, and I think it's been largely disappointing, although understandable, it's been disappointing how few kind of Jewish institutions in Indiana have been willing to take a stand on this issue.
Interesting. I mean, and the film starts with you standing at your mezuzah and talking about like putting it on the inside of the door instead of the outside. And so, like, you know, I have to say, like, I'm sitting here in Newton, Massachusetts, right? So like my experience is different. Like, I don't live in a place where I feel like Jewishness is a safety concern in the same way that I know is true where you are. So it is a really interesting and important piece to remember. Like there's such sharp distinctions of experience when you're in, around reproductive rights issues, depending on where you live, but also around the Jewishness piece. And that was a really interesting thing to see woven through the film as well. Like just what it means to stand up as a Jew. And I was curious, Paula, for you, in terms of making the film, were you initially thinking of this as kind of a Jewish story, or were you initially approaching it more as like more of a larger kind of interfaith story about the different religious groups that could be, kind of reframing the relationship between what it is to be a religious person and the relationship with abortion rights? Or were you sort of, and reproductive justice in general, or were you, sort of how did you initially start, and did that shift at all in the making of the film?
Yeah, so I don't think I ever started by saying like it's going to be like a Jewish film. It was well, I would say it because it starts like, I guess, very specific, right, which is Jewish. And it's about religious freedom, but we start like in the Jewish sphere, and then it becomes more about religious freedom for everyone. And then at the end, with Rachel Laser and Americans United, it's really about the separation of church and state and like the bedrock of our democracy. So it's using something very particular to tell a much larger story. So that was the intent of it. But of course, I was very, and intentionally was very proud that, that Jewish people are, as we do often, leading this fight for this. But the film was really, it was made by a group of diverse women. It was funded by diverse women. So it was really funded and made not outside the Jewish space, but beyond the Jewish space, so that the intention wasn't to just keep it in that space. It was to use what Elly, Rabbi Silver, and Marcy Hamilton, like everyone was doing to have this conversation. But I will say, part of like the impact around it and the conversations I want the film to inspire, I do want those to take place in religious spaces because, of course, abortion is really stigmatized and is not spoken about enough. So I hope that the film does inspire this conversation, and that it also busts the myth that people of faith are anti-abortion.
Right.
Because, as Michal, Dr. Rauscher says, the majority of Americans are people of faith and do support safe and legal access to abortion. And what the right has done has created this false binary, that if you're if you're a religious person, you must be anti-abortion. And if you're a secular person, you love abortion, like some ridiculousness. And we know that is simply untrue. And that's reflected in of course, what we're seeing in a lot of the ballots state by state, that when like Americans are given the right to exercise direct democracy, like they are voting for abortion access. So I hope all of that comes through and is spoken about within religious spaces. And I hope also, reproductive justice spaces include religious leaders and efforts in their spaces too. Because I think that's also, for whatever reason, it's been very separate. And I think there's a lot more that can be done together.
Yeah, the coalitions are really important. Tell us a little bit about what the reception of the film has been, and were there any sort of surprises there?
It's been really gratifying. When Elly and I first spoke, and the film team, my producing partner Darcy McKinnon and Roddy, like when we all came together, it was really, we wanted to create this and get it out into the world as fast as we can. As a filmmaker, like I wasn't even thinking about Sundance or anything like that. I truly wasn't. It was really we have the funding and we're going to get it out. We're going to figure it out like once that happens. But I, ended up just submitting it to Sundance for whatever reason, and we got in, which was incredible and really provided this like launch for the film that I think, we were really, really lucky to have. So it already had that profile, and then POV, PBS's POV shorts, their short strand, loved it and acquired it from Sundance. So we really wanted it to be, on public TV and, be really accessible to everyone. So POV is a great partner for that. That's what they do best. So it's been through, from the distribution part, the film end of it, really great. And those audiences have just been, so probably like truly like surprised that like, here's like religious people who are like fighting for abortion. So that it's like nice to see that happen. And a lot of people also like the creativity of the RIFRA, like flipping the script on those laws is really interesting to a lot of people who haven't thought about it that way. I mean, I didn't think about it that way until I started learning about this. So from that part of it, it's been great. And then we're on this Impact tour right now, screening tour, and it's been there's a lot of partnerships happening, and it's going across the country, and it's great.
The approach is so creative, and there's something like so, to me, sort of like satisfying and great about using something against the people who created it, right? Like it kind of is like the whole, can the master's tool dismantle the master's house? And there's something satisfying about being like, well, let's try, right? But I'm wondering if either of you encountered pushback from people who said, no, there's something, like maybe it's dangerous to use a law that we might not support in other contexts for our own purposes.
Yeah, that was definitely a conversation we had. Like I said, when Hoosier Jews for Choice was considering joining this case, we had a big community meeting. We had about 60 people attend the meeting, and our lawyers were there, or they weren't ours at the time, but the lawyers were there to kind of introduce the case, talk about what it meant to be a plaintiff, but also talk about the heart of the case. And there were some people, particularly a couple of lawyers and scholars of law in the room who asked that exact question, like what precedent does this set moving forward if this is to succeed? And it's a good question, and also like we use the tools that we have at our disposal now, and figure out that next part later is ultimately what we came to as a group. But it certainly was something that we discussed.
And it's something that I think we see it now in the reproductive justice movement, this sense of like, it's going to take working on a lot of different fronts at the same time. And as a historian, I think about that often in terms of other movements. Like when you look at the suffrage movement, that was the case too. And sometimes there are big rifts in movement over these issues. Like, do we try to do this through the courts, or do we try to do it through law? And do we try to do it on a state-by-state level, or do we try to do it on a national level? And movements are like riven by those questions. And the answer is usually like, you kind of have to be doing all of it at once. And actually, it's better if you try not to just like yell at each other for taking the tax that you're choosing to take, and instead be like, great, you work on that front, I'm going to work over here, and let's see what we can accomplish. So it's been kind of exciting to me to see that happening in the reproductive justice movement. I mean, out of a sense of obviously like desperation and urgency and crisis, but to see that people are being super creative about what are the different approaches that we can use.
Yeah, and just to chime in, I've seen, I think even from when we first started making this and releasing it, like I've seen that evolution, because I see the religious freedom argument being used more now, whereas I did see some hesitation in the right when it happened. But I think, as you said, it's like all hands on deck, and like whatever tool you have, use it. I want to add, though, just part of the impact piece, that I did have a meeting with the vice president's team around the film, and like had like a round table, and they were all, and with their communications team, and they were all like deeply interested in this argument. And I think so I think that it's valid. It's great.
Mm-hmm. You told us a little bit how you found Elly and kind of found the heart of the film. How did you connect with the other and like choose the other kind of featured people, and then decide to make the film the way that you did, to make it? We have a question about like the decision to make it a shorter documentary. Have you thought about making it? Did you think about making it as a longer film? Do you still have any thoughts about expanding it? Because obviously the issue is still very much ongoing.
Yeah, so I guess I'll answer backwards. In terms of the length, at the onset, it was going to be a short, because we were just like, I want to get it out as soon as possible. And even with a short, the speed in which it came out was insane. Like that still isn't like a normal time frame to make a film. But again, it was the testament of like everyone just working with such fervor and passion to get it out. So the length, that was intentional, but of course, like as I was making it, I mean, there's definitely so much to say that it could carry a feature for sure. Like you can make a feature about this, and and it very, very, not easily, but it's very warranted.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the length was really about getting it out as soon as possible so we can make change. In terms of like finding and working with the other folks in the film, so as I mentioned, there was an article about Rabbi Barry Silver. So he's just an incredible human and activist, and rebel rouser, and like he got to the press and like got that argument out there. So people were even thinking about like, wait a second, like religious freedom and abortion bans, like he put that in the public sphere. So he's great. So I reached out to him, and then started connecting with him, and then found out there were some other lawsuits happening in Florida, other efforts, and that's how I got to Marcy Hamilton, through actually another lawyer on the case, Danielle. And then I looked into Marcy's work more, and she's obviously like an expert on RIFRA and all of that. And then Rachel, and then Michal was through a friend at JWA, which is an organization. She introduced us. That's how I met Michal, and I was looking for, a historian to really talk about like Jewish women, like the history of our activism, and how this didn't come out of a vacuum. Like, Elly and Rabbi Silver and Rachel Laser, like this is a tradition of activism, American activism, that Jewish women have been a part of for a very long time. So that was really important to contextualize the history of it. And that Jewish piece you asked me earlier, if it's like a Jewish film, like that was really important to me to have that history in there, because we need to know our history. And Rachel Laser from AU, that was kind of like, how do we zoom out? And I learned about Americans United and all of their efforts with separate church and state, and how they were taking this on. And then when I met Rachel, and I learned that she was like the first woman to ever lead that organization, and the first Jew at the same time, she's incredible. So it was really about finding all those pieces from the particular, and then building it and having the legal experts. And but it took our whole team. There's tons of legalese of how do you explain this on film? This is it to a mainstream audience. Like this is, some of the stuff is like really a lot of it. I would say, I'm not a lawyer. Like it's complex, it's dry. Like I had to learn, like you have to really go into this, and then filmically, like how do you convey that? So that was something we all grappled with and worked really hard to try to distill, and hopefully people understand through the film.
You did a very good job. It came across very clearly, I think. And I think it's such a challenge to make something in the middle of things, like, things were changing as you were making it and after it came out. So, the film premiered just a little over a year ago, and things have changed even since then. So Elly, can you tell us a little bit about sort of what happened after the film with the case that you were part of, and where things are now with Hoosier in Indiana and with Hoosier Jews for Choice?
Yeah, and this is something I often find myself talking about when I'm speaking around the film, because Paula caught us at like such an optimistic moment. And I always feel bad having to tell audiences like we're not there anymore. So when the film ended, we had won our preliminary injunction. And there was actually in Indiana, there were actually two cases. So our case was the Riffer case, and there was another case that was brought under the right to privacy laws, that was brought by different abortion providers. And that case actually won a preliminary injunction first. And then our case won our injunction. And the two injunctions combined made it so that abortion was still accessible in Indiana. The privacy case went to the Supreme Court of Indiana and was struck down. And that ended their preliminary injunction. That happened about a year ago, I think. And their preliminary injunction was the one that was granting everyone access to abortion. Our preliminary injunction is very, very unclear. And once the other injunction was struck down, our lawyers put in, and I don't know any of the legal terminology here, so if there's any lawyers in the room, forgive me, but our lawyers put in an appeal or a request to the judge for clarification of what our injunction actually protected, and the judge declined to grant that. So what is generally understood is that the injunction from our case, which is still in place, grants the plaintiffs access to abortion. So all members of Hoosier Jews for Choice and the 4 anonymous individuals. However, it is unclear whether it is just the initial members of Hoosier Jews for Choice or people who have joined after the case was brought. The case at some point from when it was filed was certified as a class action suit, meaning that the case includes not only Hoosier Jews for Choice, but all people with a sincere religiously held belief. So we also don't know, and the courts would not clarify whether anyone with a sincerely held religious belief is protected under the injunction or not. And then the other thing that is unclear about the injunction is that while it seems to give some set of people the right to abortion, it does not protect the abortion providers. So it's unclear whether a provider could face repercussions for providing the abortion, even though the plaintiffs are allowed to get it. So what that all means is that there is no access to abortion in Indiana. And in fact, there was a study done recently that asked if any hospital would be willing to, there are certain exceptions to the abortion ban in the state. Right, I think you have up until 10 weeks in the case of rape or incest to get an abortion. And there is an exception for the life of the mother. And if there is a fatal fetal anomaly. But of the hospitals surveyed, only one hospital said they would even consider doing an abortion for those exceptions that are actually written into the law. So that's the really kind of bummer side of it. And so that's sort of the legal policy sphere. We're also starting to see, our legislature went back into session, and we are following a whole bunch of bills that are going to try to further reduce women's rights to reproductive choice.
It's such an important, I just want to interrupt for a second to say, like, it's such an important piece of the story, because we know that there are so many places, even where abortion might still be legal in most cases, but there are no providers there, or there are no providers who are willing to take the risk, right? So it's like, that's been true even before Dobbs. There was sort of a gap between what was legally on the books and what was actually accessible, and access is a totally different thing. And it's really important to see the way that plays out in these cases as well. So thank you for making that clear.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that is really unfortunate is that Hoosier Jews for Choice had a lot of momentum in the beginning, right? We were really fired up, and everyone told us, like, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And we sprinted, and now we're tired. We're tired, and we're kind of stuck. Right? So as the leadership team, there are three of us, three co-chairs, and we just don't know what to do. Like, our case was heard in the courts in December, and we're waiting for the judges or the judge to rule on that. And it's really unclear what to do now. So we are part of a group of folks that meet weekly and kind of keep updated to what's going on in the legislature. But we don't have the capacity to be like going to the state house and really doing much. And so we're a little bit stuck right now.
Right. And that's sort of part of how legal systems work, to often against people, right? Is to slow things down and kill momentum, and like just muck things up with bureaucracy, or make it so nitpicky legalistic that you lose the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
Paula, I have a question for you that has to do with this marathon question, because I was thinking about it, knowing your previous work, that like there does feel like there's this kind of through line in your work around women and bodies and self-determination. And I'm curious if you see that yourself, and if you've if you've like pursued that in an explicit way, or that just kind of emerged from your own sense of like, this is the work that I do.
Yeah, there definitely is a thread in those three films, for sure. And yes, it all has to do with the baseline, with like being seen and heard. Like that's like women being seen and heard is the foundation of it all, right? Like that's what dignified emergency care is.
Yeah, say a word about 93 Queen and about Aftershock, so people can know what to look for.
Yes. So 93 Queen is about the first all-female ambulance corps in America that was started by a group of Hasidic women in Borough Park, Brooklyn, led by Rachel Fryer, who was also the first Hasidic woman elected to public office in the US. And the corps is called Ezras Nashim, and Ezras Nashim was formed because there's an all-male corps who I'm sure people are familiar with in America. It's called Hatzalah. And Hatzalah bans women from serving. You can't be an EMT in Hatzalah. And so a group of women wanted to change that, because they said, we want to be providers for our community. And also there are women who are being traumatized by having only male options, especially in really Orthodox spaces, and definitely in the Hasidic space, where there's segregation between men and women. So, you know, and women were not calling for help, like literally not calling, and there's women who died. So it was like a dire situation, and Hatzalah would not allow them in. So they said, if you're not going to let us in, and we're not going to take no for an answer, we're making our own. And they've tried, it's been in the works for many, many years, but really once Rachel Fryer came, it got off the ground. So the film follows the formation and launch of Ezras Nashim, and it's here today. I mean, they operate, and they're fighting and expanding, and they're like the little engine that could. And these women are like feminism in that community and beyond. Like, that is what it looks like. So that was like really, I love telling that story with them. And it also was told from within. It was really the women like of that community that don't often are not often given voices, not within their own homes, because these are like powerhouse women, like they're heard. That I've seen that. They're not silenced often, but we don't. There's not a lot of representation of Hasidic women in media. So that was really important to me, to empower the people that I'm working with. And Aftershock is broadly about the U.S. maternal mortality crisis that disproportionately affects Black women. So we live in a country that is the most dangerous place in the industrialized world to give birth, and Black women die 3 times the rate of white women. And that story and that investigation is told through the lived experiences of 2 families who lost mothers, Shimona Gibson and Amber Rose Isaac. And it's about their activism. And then we also uncover, the system that perpetuates this, as well as the journey of a pregnant woman, Felicia. So that, that is, again, just like about being seen and heard, because women, for the people are not seen and heard, and Black women are really not seen and heard. And that is like the crux of why this is happening, because we are made invisible in our own healthcare, and we're disenfranchised in the choices around our reproduction. And it's all different kinds of reasons, too much too soon, too little too late, like they're all different permeations of, too many C-sections, not giving us, like, and it's all happening because women are being ignored and dismissed, and women of color, there's racism that's built into the system that is then comes out. So and under God, of course, is, we're saying here it's about reproductive justice, but I just want to say, like, as we're talking about Indiana and these bans, like the 10 states that have the worst maternal mortality rates all have abortion bans. Right. So like this works hand in hand with each other. And so in places where there's like literally forced birth in a way, it's also the most dangerous place to give birth. Mm-hmm. So we're just in like a full attack on reproductive health. And clearly I'm very passionate about that. And uplifting stories also about marginalized communities and giving voice to those individuals and communities. So it's something that comes out in my work, but I wouldn't say like I intentionally set out to make films just about that. And I'm actually working on another film now that has nothing to do with reproductive health, and so it's something that I'm so proud to uplift, but it's not an exclusive topic.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us a hint about what you're working on now?
Oh yeah, it's really fun. It's so the one that I can tell you about it's about Grossinger's, the hotel.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's a really fun.
Also a story with lots of women's voices to be told.
Yes.
For sure. as we've been talking about, like, this is a story that's ongoing. Elly, as you're saying, it's really hard to keep the momentum going. What can people do to support this work? And I, of course, am thinking especially of those of us who live in states where we don't have to be fighting our own abortion bans or restrictions in our home states, but want to be able to, what can we do from afar, or what can people who might be closer by do as well?
It's a great question. Vote. Vote, whether you're in a state that allows abortion or not. Vote locally and vote nationally. And give your money. Donate. And, you know, when I've been asked this question, I like to highlight two areas or two places where I think it's really important to donate. And one is abortion funds. And there are lots of abortion funds you can give to. There's the National Abortion Fund. States have their own abortion funds. Indiana has an abortion fund, right? And these are funds that help women access abortions, and they are even more important now in places where you can't access abortion. Right, so the Hoosier Abortion Fund helps pay for and arrange travel. I can't remember if the Hoosier Abortion Fund or if it's the national, there are funds that will pay for childcare if a woman needs to travel to get an abortion. They'll help pay for the actual procedure. And, you know, I was very fortunate when I had my own abortion to get funds from the Hoosier Abortion Fund. And not only did they give me the money, but they worked with me for months afterwards to make that the financial transfer possible, because there was all this red tape that was preventing it. I mean, in my experience, they really just went above and beyond to not only help me cover the costs, but really make me feel seen. So donate to abortion funds. But the other place that people don't necessarily think about is, and I'm sorry to be a little bit political here, but like the Democratic Party, going back to the point about voting, and I can only speak for Indiana here, but our party is really neglected. We don't get enough money so that we can't amplify Democratic candidates. We often can't get Democratic candidates in counties where Republicans run unopposed. And if we had more people who would vote for reproductive justice, which we know is largely Democrats, we might not be in this situation. But politically, you know, and I can only speak for Indiana, but we are, around election time, we feel very neglected. If you want to do like a letter writing campaign, I think 2 years ago, actually last year and the year before, Hoosier Jews for Choice supported a Sukkot and Vote event, where we basically put together a guide for how people around the state of Indiana could host a Sukkot and Vote event, basically get people in your sukkah and write to voters to get out the vote. And you can go online and find, programs that will say that will give you addresses of people to mail to. And Indiana is not even you can't find anyone in Indiana. They're like the swing states, and we're kind of considered a lost cause. Even though we voted for Obama whenever that was, 12 years ago, right? We weren't always a lost cause. So that, if you want to get that's what people can do.
Thank you. That's really helpful and a really good reminder. And yeah, I mean, I think that sometimes we lose sight of how important the local is when we're focused on big national questions and the ways that, national politics work with the Electoral College and all of that. So that's a really, really important reminder.
Yeah, I mean, if I can just jump in here again. One thing I have learned from this whole process, I never really thought about how important the local is until Dobbs really kicked this question down to the state level. Um, oh yeah, but just even if you're in a place where your abortion rights are protected, like still vote. It can, unfortunately, like things can change really quickly. So don't take it for granted.
Yeah, for sure. I see we have a question about distribution of the film. So Paula, can you tell us if people are interested in bringing Under God to their communities, how that would work?
Yes, that's a perfect time for that because that's exactly what we're in the process of doing. We have been doing. If you would like a community screening, please, please email me. I will forward it on. If you go to my website, you'll be able to send an inquiry, and I'm working with the Red Owl team, and I think they're on this, and we will make it happen. So it's for free. You can screen the film and bring it to your community.
Right.
I wanted to chime into that question of what people can do. And to add to everything Elly was saying, I think it's so important to just keep talking about abortion and destigmatizing it and just making it known that this is a part of healthcare. There's a lot of people who don't even know that abortion care is like a routine part of maternal health care. And if someone is suffering a miscarriage for like a wanted pregnancy, like a lot of what is considered abortion care is actually implemented in that situation. I went through that. So I think there's a lot of misinformation around what abortion care is. So the more we talk about it and destigmatize it, the more people will realize, I think, how crucial it is to protect, even if like they're not a birthing person or whatever it is, if it's on their radar, like we need to get it on their radar, and especially in states that will have ballot measures, like that's where they can directly make that known.
Right. Yeah. I think one of the pieces of the story of reproductive justice that's so important is how much this issue, often abortion is cast as being about people not wanting to be pregnant, but often these issues come up when people very much want to be pregnant and they're going through IVF, or they, as in your case, Elly, have a wanted pregnancy that needs to be terminated. So that's not viable. So, I think being able to destigmatize and to kind of broaden people's perspectives, the right has done such a good job of framing abortion as one particular thing. And we know that it is so much broader, and also that the laws as they're being implemented are not just going to be focusing on abortion. They're going to be going after many other things, IVF and birth control and other kinds of things like that. So it is a really crucial piece of that. I want to get back as we come to an end, to one of the questions that we sort of started with, which is just like how much of a Jewish story there is around reproductive justice and the roles that Jews have played in this fight, both now and historically. And this is something that I've been thinking about for years. My dissertation was actually about the women's health movement. So I've been working on these topics, and certainly at JWA, it's something we think about. And years ago, I remember working with the amazing women's health activist Barbara Seaman, Zichronah Livracha, may her memory be for a blessing, who was writing a piece actually for our encyclopedia about Jewish women and health activism, and called me up and was like, why is it, do you think, that Jewish women are so involved in these issues and have been at the forefront? And I think it's on the one hand a really hard question to answer, and yet on the other hand, like, for both of you, obviously, you spoke very clearly about how there is some connection to your sense of Jewish values and Jewish identity that draws you to this. So I'm wondering if one or both of you want to reflect on that question a little bit about why this feels like a Jewish issue for you, and or why this feels like something that is why there would be this long Jewish history around these issues.
It's a really good conversation piece and starting point, because I don't have like an answer, but I think for me, I think the roles of Jewish women, like throughout history, from thousands of years until today, like, we're strong, we are powerful, we make things happen, and at the same time, there's so much, I'm sure, in like every people, like, reproduction is a huge part of that. And we know about all of our ancestors and their stories around fertility and how that is like baked into womanhood in our history. So I think that's what I'm trying to say is like, that's built into, as a woman, like, I think our tradition of Jewish womanhood and identity is reproduction. So that feels like innately Jewish, but the activism around, like, I think also like the sanctity of life, which sounds like pro-life in the bet, like how they've said it, but really, it's about respecting the person who's living, and that is something that is front and center, that we have such a value for living beings and human life. Like any law or commandment could be broken to save any life, any human. So the value that it puts on a mother and a woman before the fetus is something that's like very, very clear. So I think in Jewish tradition, Jewish law, the value of life is really front and center in a lot of ways. So it feels like something that we really need to protect. I don't think I answered you, but those are just thoughts that came to my head.
No, that is very helpful and beautiful. Thank you.
And I guess to me, what jumps out when you ask this question is what you said in the introduction in introducing me, which is just how much I think the values of pursuing justice and, tikkun olam, saving, healing, fixing the world, is so ingrained in Judaism and such an important part of our values. And I know that, I mean, that's what drives me. And I think I imagine that's what drives a lot of people, women and men, in this work through through a Jewish lens.
Thank you both so much, Elly and Paula, for being with us tonight, and for ending on that really beautiful and heartfelt note, and for sharing your stories and doing this important work to keep abortion safe and legal. We're really grateful for your leadership and really grateful to have this chance to talk to you, and to share the beautiful film. As always, there is more to discover at JWA for people who are interested in these topics. I didn't mention this earlier, but we did a podcast episode on the Jewish women who are leading a similar case in Kentucky to oppose abortion ban there. We also did a podcast episode on the Jane Collective, a group that provided abortions before Roe v. Wade. So I encourage you to listen to both of those. We have many articles on the many Jewish women reproductive justice activists through the ages, such as Fania Mindal, who helped Margaret Sanger open the first birth control clinic in the US in 1916, or Dr. Bessie Moses, who founded Baltimore's first birth control clinic in 1927, or Harriet Fishel Pilpel, a lawyer who helped create the legal arguments for reproductive rights before Roe. You can read our encyclopedia article about Jewish legal perspectives on abortion. And finally, I want to mention that we have a story collecting initiative. And one of the topics that we're collecting on in partnership with NCJW is abortion stories. So if you have a story to share related to abortion, of your own, in your family, helping someone get an abortion, abortion rights activism, you can submit it on our site at the link we shared in the chat, or on our Story Aperture mobile app. I also want to mention that next Shabbat, February 9th and 10th, is Repro Shabbat, which is led by NCJW and in which JWA is a partner. So check out the Repro Shabbat website to find out about events in your community. And finally, please join us next week, same time, same place, for a discussion of the film The Women's Balcony with Professor Rachel Harris and guest moderated by Rabbi Lila Kazdan, because I will be out of town. It is a very funny and smart Israeli film. You can stream it on Amazon, and I really hope you'll join us for that conversation. And thank you all for being with us tonight. And until next time, be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Good
so
night,
much.
everybody.